Hello everyone and welcome to the April RELO Andes webinar. For those of you unfamiliar with the RELO office, this is the Regional English Language Office. We are based here in Lima, Peru at the U.S. Embassy. The RELO office is in charge of all things having to do with English language programs in Spanish-speaking South America. My name is Maggie Steingraber. I am an English language fellow. I am based here in Lima. I host and coordinate the webinar, so I am with you every month for each presentation. Any questions you have will usually go through me, so feel free to write. I can share all the contact information at the end of the presentation. So we have two presenters today. Both of them are English language fellows located in Latin America. We have Cindy and we have Trent. Cindy, Trent, are you there?
We are.
I'm here. Hi.
All right. Perfect. All right. We'll get this over to you, and you can begin your presentation whenever you are ready.
Excellent. All right. Thank you very much, Maggie. Our presentation today is called Assessment for Learning, and I am Cindy Spoon. I'm speaking to you from Santiago, Chile, where I work with public school teachers supporting their professional development, and I'm glad that you joined us today.
I am Trent Hager. I am based at Universidad Católica, otherwise known as UNICA, in Managua, Nicaragua, and I mostly work with teacher training and TEYL, which is Teaching English to Young Learners. So thanks for joining us today.
All right. Now that you know a little bit about us, over the next 30 minutes, we want to learn more about you. So please do participate in our chat boxes and polls and hand raising. So let's go ahead and get started with the webinar. Here are the main points of our webinar about assessment in the classroom. First of all, how do you know that students are learning, and what do you do if they are not? So we're going to begin with a poll. Again, we want to get to know a little bit more about all of you. And we want to ask, how often do you conduct assessments in your classes? So here are your choices. Every day, once a week, once a month, or at the end of a unit. So go ahead and take this poll.
Can you guys see the results?
Yes, so 63% of you do assessment every day. That's excellent. So this webinar is going to show you some quick and easy ways that you can continue to do assessment every day. Excellent. All right. So I'm going to turn this over to Trent now to talk a little bit more about assessment.
So when we're talking about assessment, in general, we have two main types. The first type being summative assessment, which is generally our, as you see here, final evaluative judgment. This usually comes after a test or at the end of a semester, and it's associated with the word you see in red, grading. However, the type we're going to focus on today is formative assessment. You can see this is also called ongoing assessment. And we're going to see a red word pop up here that's representative of that, and we call that guiding. Whereas formative assessment happens on what can be a daily or weekly basis. We use this to guide the students rather than apply a certain grade to what they're doing. And we're focusing on formative assessment because we really want to show how it benefits both students and teachers. So on our slide here, we have the prompt, why use formative assessment? You're going to see two quotes pop up on your screen. I'll just let you read those, but basically they're research. And what research tells us about formative assessment is not only that it works and works very well, but it's beneficial for both teachers and students, which is something we really want to highlight in this webinar. It benefits the students, but it also can benefit the teachers as well. So today we're going to be looking at three formative assessment tools, and as we go through today's slides, we want you to be thinking about your own content and students. So how could these tools and ideas be used with your students? And along the way, we're going to ask you to share your ideas, so you may want to start thinking and maybe taking some notes about that. Today we're going to be looking at exit tickets, observation checklists, and peer feedback with rubrics.
All right. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how to use formative assessment, and we're going to begin with what happens before the lesson even starts. A teacher needs to make sure they set goals and expectations. Those are the learning objectives. And students and teachers need to have the same idea of what is quality work. So do your students know what is expected of them? Have they seen the desired outcome modeled? This is what's really important, that both teachers and students have the same standards for achievement, a shared goal. And this is really important to set up at the very beginning of a lesson. All right, Trent?
So it can be used before the lesson, but it can also be used during the lesson to compare student performance to goals and expectations, which is what we call our learning objectives. And what this means is students can monitor their own progress, and at the same time, this allows teachers to track and assess students' progress. And that way, the teacher can find out if the students are understanding and completing the objectives, which once again are our goals and expectations.
All right, and then after the lesson, this is when the teacher is looking at trying to close that gap, the difference between the student's performance and the standard that was set at the beginning of the lesson. So teachers are going to assess the student performance and provide feedback. And I want to focus on that word feedback, the guidance. This is a critical aspect of formative assessment. This is where the student is using that assessment feedback to understand and improve their future performances. But teachers are also going to reflect on their instruction, and they can adjust their future teaching to accommodate the needs that they see based on the assessment. All right, Trent.
So now we're going to look at how to apply formative assessment. And I really love this cartoon, as I feel it captures many of the issues we come across with assessment. So as this cartoon implies, summative assessments are often rigid and they don't allow for student differentiation. So if the test is to climb that tree, some students, such as the monkey, are going to have a great advantage over some of the other students there. And so why we chose to focus on formative assessment is because these types of assessment are more flexible. They can take into account the different needs and abilities of our students. So we're going to show you how you can implement this in your classrooms.
So I have set up here a timeline. What does it look like for us as teachers in the classroom? So you can see we have the first day of school in the bottom left-hand corner, and then we're going to progress through this timeline from week 1, week 4, week 7. Up in the right-hand corner, we have an actual unit of instruction from the Chilean public school system, Unit 1, and they have their learning objectives categorized by reading, listening, oral expression, and writing. So week 1, we've chosen to look at an oral expression objective, and that's greetings. We're going to teach our students some greetings. So our objective is a speaking task, but how will we know if the students learn this objective? And what do we do if they didn't learn it? So we need to be able to assess this skill. So we've identified the objective, and now we're going to choose an appropriate type of formative assessment. And in this case, we're going to use exit tickets. So at this point, I would like to do a hand raise activity. Raise your hand if you have used an exit ticket in your class.
We're at, I don't know if you can see it, Cindy, but about 20% have raised their hand.
Okay. Well, that's pretty good that 20% of you have used exit tickets. By the end of this webinar, we hope that you'll feel confident to use, for everybody to be able to use exit tickets. So let's take a look at what an exit ticket is. It will ask students to respond to a prompt at the end of class, and that prompt might be having students write or draw a response, and maybe it takes 2 or 3 minutes. It's a quick response. Teachers will collect that and review it, and then the teacher uses this information to gauge or assess comprehension, and then assist in lesson planning for the next class. All right, Trent.
All right, so if we consider the objectives Cindy told us, the students have been in school for a week or 2, and as the questions indicate, how do you know the students are learning, and how do you know which students don't understand yet? The answer to these questions are going to be important because they're going to help you determine what your next lesson is going to be and whether you need to review or recycle or whatever. So if we remember our first objective, which was greetings, we designed an exit ticket to find out how many students know 3 greetings of the day. So in the middle, in the red, you see a very simple exit ticket for the students to write 3 greetings. We need to find out as teachers what the students know or what they have learned. Essentially, we need to collect data that's easy to check, so we're going to use the exit ticket to do this. And once you have your students complete the exit ticket and you collect it, you can see the results of your data. You see 6 students have a firm grasp of the concept. 20 understand it, but it's not exactly perfect there. And we see 8 students have very limited understanding. Now, you can use this data to find out what will you do in your next class, which Cindy's going to help us understand that.
All right, so we've looked at those exit ticket results, and now we need to make a decision, right? What are we going to do in our next class? Well, one option would be to work in a small group with just the 8 students who had the least understanding, those that are struggling the most. Another choice would be to ask the 6 students who understood the task very well to work with the 8 students who didn't. Or we could move on to the next lesson, but greet students as they enter class using these greetings, hoping that that way they will understand and learn them. Or maybe we would change the way that we present the information and reteach this in the next class. So there is no right or wrong answer per se in these choices. What we want you to do is choose the one that most closely fits you. How would you handle your next class after seeing the results from the exit tickets? So we're going to do another poll with you. Those same statements appear here. What are you most likely to do? So again, choose your response.
And the poll is open. About 20% of people have voted.
All right.
And share the results. There you are.
Okay. So 56% of the respondents said they would ask students who understand to work with those who don't. Interesting. So again, we would point out that there isn't necessarily one right or wrong answer, and in fact, there might even be an option E, which would be to do a combination of these choices. But what's important here is that as teachers, we are reflective about our choices and thinking about the best way to respond to the needs of our students. All right, so we're going to move on at this point to Trent.
So summarizing exit tickets, I know we went over that pretty quickly. That's the way a webinar goes sometimes. But we see that the exit tickets have benefits for both teachers and students. For teachers, they get immediate feedback on whether the students are understanding or not. It's also a way to provide some documentation of student learning, which obviously helps with lesson planning and giving us feedback for our next lessons. For the students, this is very low stress assessment. It allows them to reflect on the day's lesson to see, so they understand if they've known it, and this promotes a deeper understanding of the content or the skill or whatever it is that you're assessing, which is important for the students to know. And so now we'd like to hear from you. Thinking of some content you may be teaching this week, we'd like to know how you could use an exit ticket. So for example, if you're teaching children and you're teaching color vocabulary, a possible exit ticket would be where students draw a piece of fruit and identify the color they see. Something as simple as that. So how would you use an exit ticket this week? Put your brief answer in the chat box for us. And Maggie, I'm using my iPad and I have no presenter controls, so we need your help on the chat box.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, we have Marcella saying that she would use it for checking understanding. Juliana has for asking more questions from the teacher. We have Ricardo saying summative assessment. Practicing new vocabulary is a different one. And practicing new grammar structures. There we go. And to ask if there's something they do not understand was another one.
Okay, let's move on to our next slide. So you guys had some great ideas that I heard there. Thank you for sharing those with us. This slide shows a few more specific ideas. We're not going to read them all, but students can fill in key content, multiple choice questions, closed paragraphs. What else? Yeah, everything that you guys said, including these. So what we really want you to take from this slide is just the amazing variety of possibilities that exist with exit tickets for quick and easy formative assessment. And I think we're going to move on to our next type.
All right, we're going to go back to our timeline. We're back in the classroom. It's now week 4. I'm going to go back to Unit 1 and look at my objectives, and I'm choosing to teach a listening objective at this point. I want to see if students can identify a topic and the general ideas in a discussion with their peers, and I'm assessing them on their listening ability. So what's an assessment tool I could use to assess this skill? In this case, we're going to use an observation checklist. So Trent's going to tell us a little bit more about that.
Great. Checklists are another quick and simple type of assessment for teachers. And I'm fairly certain we're all familiar with a checklist, but in case not, this is when we have a list of objectives for an activity, and then we have a list of our students' names as well. And this allows the teacher to just observe and check off whether the students are completing the objectives or not. The great thing about checklists is they can be used for behaviors, for skills, for content, for interactions, and they're really useful for almost any activity you want to do. Let's do a quick hand raise before we move on to the next slide. And how many of you have used a checklist for student evaluation?
Yep, it looks like it's stopping around 35%.
Okay, great. So let's show you an example of a checklist. So here we have the objectives the teacher has written for the students across the top. And then written down the side, we have the students' names. Then, as you see in the example, the teacher can just check whether the students are completing these objectives. Now, remember, a checklist can be created for any content, skills, even behaviors that you're teaching them. So at the bottom, you see you can even check whether students are using appropriate eye contact, they're taking turns, or exhibiting positive interactions. So Cindy's going to show us a short video with a teacher engaging her students in a discussion about environmental problems and how she uses a checklist.
Thanks. So we're going to watch, as Trent said, a short video clip. We're going to watch this teacher use a checklist to assess students' speaking and listening skills. There's a statement on the left of your screen, and I'm going to ask you to listen to how this statement is completed by the teacher. She says, speaking and listening standards can only be assessed while kids are blank. So I'm going to ask you to listen to what she has to say about that, and let's go ahead and watch our video. We'll just watch for about 2 minutes.
Today, for our academic discussion, we're going to be sitting in line order. And the reason is because that's going to help me to be able to score you so that I can be checking off to see how you're participating. Today was a new challenge for me of being able to simultaneously help facilitate the discussion and also try to do some assessment during the discussion. Speaking and listening standards can only be assessed while kids are talking to one another and listening to one another. I'm keeping track of who's using eye contact. I appreciate Aisha. I see that she's using excellent eye contact. One of my main goals today with that strategy was to be looking at my checklist and really thinking about who was showing those 3 skills. The first one was whether students were able to bring a new claim into the circle or bring evidence into the circle, so contribute an idea. And that's kind of step 1.
In my opinion, the California drought is the most important environmental problem because it hasn't been raining for the past 4 years.
It's the most basic because they don't need to have really been paying attention to what was going on in the rest of the discussion in order to do that. They can just look at their piece of paper to offer it.
I agree, but I think endangered animals is more important.
Second thing is whether they're able to offer evidence that supports somebody else's claim or somehow relate their comment to what's already been shared.
I want to add on to Sandra because, like, the climate change, there's a lot of methane. And I also agree with you, and I want to add on, Natalie, because the more carbon dioxide and methane that we make, the more it's going to harm the ocean.
And then the third is, which to me is again the highest level, is could they ask a question that's either clarifying or elaborative of a student who's shared.
How does it harm the water? How does it bring a lot of air pollution? Carbon dioxide, where does it come from?
So one of the most important things for me in teaching English language learners is that ELD is not just an isolated.
All right, we're going to stop there, and I hope everybody caught what she said. Speaking and listening standards can only be assessed while kids are talking to one another and listening to one another. So I encourage all of you to set up activities in your classroom where this can take place, because now this provides students with an opportunity for authentic language use. And as you can see, it's a great way for you as the teacher to assess their listening and speaking skills. So we're going to go on and talk a little bit more about the benefits of a checklist. For teachers, it's very easy to create and implement. You can assess many students at a time, and it provides a very quick look of how their learning is progressing. It provides for individualized feedback. It clarifies the learning objectives, and these are things that are true for both the students and the teachers. And it also is promoting transparency. So for students, the nice thing about it is that it's really supporting a student-centered classroom. And it helps students really focus on a specific content and skill. So we're going to ask another poll now. After watching this video and knowing what the objectives were for this lesson, how would you use the information from the checklist to provide your students with feedback? Because of course the feedback is where the students are actually growing and learning. So here are your choices. To give feedback, I would A, provide individualized comments to students, or B, meet in small groups with students who did not achieve the checklist objectives, or I would role play with prepared sentences that students can use in a discussion. So for example, you might teach them how to say, I have the same opinion, or can you give an example? Or D, maybe you would do all of the above, or E, maybe you would do none of the above because you feel students will learn from their peers. So we invite you to respond to this poll.
All right, and I'll share the results with you. There you are.
Wow. Well, I like it. Very interesting. 60%, the majority said they would do a little bit of 3 of those. And I like that because it shows that perhaps you're taking into account the individual needs of your classroom and students. So that's great. So I'm going to pass this back to Trent, and he's going to ask you another question.
Okay, we would like to hear from you again because we all teach in unique contexts and environments. So in the chat box, please type a brief response to the prompt here. How else could you use information from a checklist to provide students with feedback? Remember, this is your opportunity to share your ideas and with your colleagues, so please help us out with a response. And again, Maggie, would you mind monitoring that?
Sure, no problem. We have error correction is one, so making note of any mistakes that they make. Monitoring participation is another one. Yeah. Group work is another one. I think how active they are in the group work, maybe. Another one is their use of grammar and vocabulary. How on task they are, if they are, I think if they're following the instructions.
Okay. So we see, and that's, I think, one of the most powerful uses of an observation checklist is participation, which we often use to judge group work or if students are on task. And that's something we can do when we're observing, is just walk around and are they participating or not, which is often a strong indicator if they're going to be using the language or learning with the language. So thank you very much for sharing your ideas with us. And we're going to look at our last form of assessment today.
All right, looking at our timeline, we're moving on to week 7, and now we're going to do a writing task. And the objective is for students to share personal information in writing. And let's think about how we can assess this skill. And we're going to use peer feedback with rubrics. So.
Okay, this is actually 2 types of assessment. The first one is rubrics, which is just a list of performance categories or a list of objectives and expectations you want the students to accomplish. And as it says here, it's a way for teachers to model and provide support, and it gives students standards that they can follow. So a real quick hand raise, how many of you have used rubrics in your classrooms?
There looks like it's about 41.
Great. And the other part of this is peer feedback. And this is when peer feedback allows students to give feedback to their peers based upon a set of criteria. In this case, it's the rubric that you provide them. And then the teachers can use these for evaluation as well, as part of their evaluation. So let's do one more hand raise. So please raise your hand if you've used peer feedback in your classroom before.
Slowly, very slowly. I think it's around 25%.
Okay, great. Well, so in this webinar, we put these 2 types of assessment together because we feel the combination, along with peer feedback, forms a very powerful version of formative assessment. So on the next screen, we're going to see an example of a simple rubric, and this is a writing rubric. So as you can see, we have 3 emojis at the top: the frowny face, the, middle face, and then the happy face. And over on the left side, we have our objectives, which is using capital letters, proper mechanics, use of grammar, and then word choice. And so what this rubric does, it provides a set of objectives and expectations for the students. Now, peer feedback can be done with a variety of assignments. This one is based on a writing one. And we're going to revisit this rubric in just a minute, but first Cindy is going to show us a brief video on using peer feedback in the classroom.
All right, so as you watch this video, we want you, we want you to consider how students and the teacher benefit from peer feedback and from rubrics. So let's listen.
Peer assessment is when you have a partner and you both look over your work and you say, and you both list the strengths and weaknesses and you fix it.
I feel like I'm next to a teacher, yet I can relate to my peer more because they're basically my age.
It was really helpful because sometimes you don't get your ideas straight and forget to include something. But when you look at the rubric, you know what you have to include.
Yeah, it helped me because I can see what I did wrong for myself, and then my peers or my friends or whatever, they can tell me so that I can become better, and they can also become better from reading my work.
Through this process, my grading over the years has gone higher for all my students. And it's not because I'm being a generous grader, it's because the kids are so involved in the independent process of learning through peer and self-assessment that they are able to really raise their grade to where they feel it needs to be.
Before I was really doing self-assessment, peer assessment, I wasn't really clear to myself what I was teaching. So if I wasn't clear about it, how are the students going to be clear about it? And then when I had to really sit down and think about that, it totally changed my approach to teaching and what the children learn.
So, how do you do peer assessment? One way to do peer assessment is to use the ladder of feedback created by David Perkins of Harvard University. This method provides a process of critique that guides students to generate kind, thoughtful, and effective feedback. The ladder of feedback asks students to formulate their assessments in the following way. First, questions of clarification, such as, am I reading this correctly? Second, comments on value. For example, what I think works really well is. Third, comments of concern, such as, what I worry about is. And fourth, suggestions for revision, i.e., maybe this part would work better if you. Students may also base their feedback on the rubric you have created with them for the assignment. It is critical that as students confer, you walk around your classroom to monitor progress and ensure that the ladder of feedback is properly applied, that each student is receiving useful feedback, and as importantly, when your class completes the peer assessment process, students will have.
Sorry, I jumped out a little bit, but ample time for revision was the end. And I want to just comment a little bit then about some of the benefits that they mentioned, like that peers are able to relate better to each other. It gives them a chance to see different models of learning. And for teachers, it's a way to walk around and monitor the interaction that students are having. And you can assess so many other things like students' ability to make decisions and sharing knowledge. It also builds a wonderful sense of community. But I want to go on now to this slide that talks about sentence starters. They mentioned this idea that the feedback is meant to be kind, thoughtful, and effective. So as teachers, one way that we can be sure that we promote that is by the use of sentence starters. And we can look at the sentence starters that the teacher gave the students for this activity. One of them said, what I think works really well is blank. And another sentence starter they shared was, maybe this part would work better if you blank. So not only do students need sentence starters to support their language production, but in this way we really help control the tone of the feedback, and we make sure that it's given in a very positive way. So using sentence starters can happen throughout any lesson, but in this particular example they are really a way to make sure that it's a constructive process, this peer feedback. All right, now we're going to go back and look again at that rubric that Trent introduced.
Okay, so we're back with our rubric now. And as you can see, this is a rubric for self-assessment. Look at the statements. I did not use capital letters. I never used periods or marks. This is for the students to assess themselves. So the students use this rubric to assess their own writing expectations based on capital letters, mechanics, grammar, and word choice. And then next we're going to look at peer feedback, and I want you to note that the students are going to score this the same, a little soon. The capital letters and mechanics are going to be the same score, but the grammar and word choice are going to be a little bit different. So here we see peer feedback, and you can note that just a simple change in the language did not use capital letters, so taking the I out of it. So it can be for the one student to assess another one. So we can see the two students agreed on the first two standards, capital letters and mechanics, but they're going to differ on the last two standards of grammar and word choice. Essentially what this shows, according to the peer, is that the initial student overestimates their grammatical and lexical competence. And that's really a good thing, because this is where peer feedback gets interesting and potentially powerful. Because when the students don't agree, it is an opportunity for discussion and learning and language production between the students. And as the video stated, what we often see happening in peer feedback is the students end up teaching one another. And as the video also said, often feedback from another student is more relatable or accepted than when it comes from the teacher. And a little bit later in that video we just watched, there's actually a great comment from a boy, and he says, after self-assessment, I think my work is perfect, but peer feedback helps me see all the problems that I couldn't see without help. Now that's a fantastic quote, because in my opinion, combining peer feedback with rubrics provides students not only expectations of their work, but it gives them discussion points regarding language usage, and it promotes language production and the building of student autonomy. So
I'll just point out a few of the teacher benefits for peer feedback and rubrics. Teachers can evaluate knowledge and skills. The rubric serves as a clear evaluation system, and it also trains students to recognize what successful work looks like. It allows teachers to identify strengths and weaknesses, and teachers can also clarify the desired learning objectives for an assignment. And students benefit by creating a learning community, and it's a very student-centered activity, but then they also have more accountability among themselves. They see each other as resources for understanding and checking, which is also a great way to empower students. And the rubric provides transparency, so it's clear what the expectations are. And the last thing that's really interesting, it builds 21st century skills, such as cooperation, collaboration, and respect for other perspectives. So now we'd like to hear a little bit more from you again.
All right, last time, I know we're going over this pretty fast, but we kind of have to because of our time limit. So we want to hear from you again. Share your ideas in the chat box on what benefits do you see in using peer feedback. And Maggie, if you would help us, we would appreciate it.
Yeah, no problem. Okay, so the benefits that people see from using pure feedback. Again, you can type into the chat box. Oh, there we go. We have Martina, who says that it gives the teacher more time. She says makes the classroom more relaxed, more participation from students. Student-centered learning is another one. Trust and community among peers, that's what Victor says.
Nice.
Yeah. Ricardo says critical thinking. Victor says students participate with more confidence. Hades says students get involved with the activity and they improve without noticing.
Great, fantastic. Yeah, we have our attendee Victor. Maybe he can give a future presentation because he really nailed it there when he talks about it creates a community and leads to more confident students, and the students start seeing each other as a resource. That's fantastic. Great, thanks for sharing that with us, guys. And so in a summary, we hope this webinar has helped you understand assessment for learning and using formative assessment, and we encourage you guys to be creative and design your own. In fact, you can do a peer feedback with rubrics, and while the students are doing that, you can have an observation checklist and go around and check their participation, and then you can end the class with an exit ticket if you like. You can do all of these in one class if you want. So be creative. Remember that assessment can be used before, during, and after lessons to provide feedback for the students, and it's a great way to build autonomy and confidence in your students. So thank you for attending our webinar and your participation.
Thank you, everybody.
All right, thank
If you have questions, you can contact us.
Great, thank you, Cindy and Trent. And again, we still have about 5 minutes, so if anyone joining us has any questions, please feel free to type it into the chat box, and with the time remaining, we can have Cindy and Trent answer the questions. I think there was one question that came up back when you were talking about the exit ticket. See if I can find it. It was from Anna, and she wants to know if you recommend using exit tickets during every class or after every class, or if it's just a once in a while.
I think use it as much as you think it'll be beneficial. There's so many types of assessment out there. I tend to not overuse it because then the students get a little bit bored and it kind of loses some of its power. So I tend to use it once a week at most. But if you feel you can use it more often with your students, then it's great. If you get the kind of data you want, it's fantastic. It's really up to you and your teaching context.
And I would agree with everything Trenton said, and also just point out that an exit ticket can be so varied that, you know, one day the exit ticket could be asking for students to give a verbal response as they leave the classroom, and the next day the exit ticket could be asking them to draw a picture. So even if you maintained an exit ticket every day, it would still be possible to make it very different and provide variety.
Absolutely.
And Angela asks if you have any advice on how we can assess reading skills.
Yeah, I think that what we're looking for with reading is often comprehension of details. So as we saw in that checklist video, the teacher had set up a group activity where they were discussing a topic. And it could well have been that the students had read an article about environmental issues. And so even though the checklist there was being used for speaking and listening, she was probably also able to assess their understanding of an article that they read. So that's one way you could assess reading comprehension. I think asking students to role play a reading that they've done is another great way, and again, you're getting at more than just one of the domains when you do something like that.
Yeah, and exit tickets are also good for assessing reading. Give them a sentence starter. So if they're reading a novel about a certain character, you can then, what does this character think of blah 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 in your opinion, and you can assess how much they've been reading or how much they've been understanding about that character's development. Again, that's a very large skill, and it depends on what you're teaching, but absolutely, role plays, checklists, exit tickets can all be used with reading skills. Like we said in the last slide, be creative. You guys have fantastic ideas, and you can adapt these for pretty much anything you want.
Hi, and Julissa has a question. She'd like to know if it's possible to assess large groups of students, maybe like 50 or more, by using peer assessment, and if so, how?
I think it's possible. It may be that you can only assess half the class in one class period and get the other half in another class period. But as you noted in the video, when students are doing peer assessment, the teacher has the freedom to walk around the classroom. And so this allows you to get to many students in, a 45-minute or a 90-minute class.
Yeah, and I've used this in large writing classes before, actually, where the students print out a paper that they've written, and in a group of 5, they go through the rubric and provide peer feedback to that student, so the student gets actually a lot of feedback from multiple students. So I think it can be a really good benefit in large groups.
Okay. And the last question, yeah, that is, what should you do during peer review if students aren't kind to one another?
I guess I would take a moment to bring the class back together as a whole group and discuss standards that you had set and language that you expect students to use. And if you need to, then maybe pull that student aside later and ask them to tell you what their thinking was. It's always good to let students share their thoughts before we jump in and make evaluative statements.
And actually, I feel Cindy addressed this. It's about providing a language model for the students to use. And when she talked about giving them sentence starters that support language production, you're actually providing them a model for how to give kind feedback and kind advice. And as long as you teach it to the students, teach them how to use that first, you're actually kind of addressing that before it even begins. And you're going to have to reteach it again because this just happens sometimes. But again, those sentence starters and giving them language models to go from is great.
All right, well, thank you to both of you. I think it is about 4 o'clock, so that is about all the time we have. So thank you to both of you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Maggie. Thanks for everybody for attending.
All right, we hope you enjoyed this webinar. We do the webinars every month. Our next webinar will be from Kayla. She is a fellow in Panama, and she will be talking about how to teach English in a multi-level classroom, and that will be on May 24th from 3 to 4 p.m. Peru time. So we hope you can join us for that. You can find us on Facebook if you'd like to learn more about our webinars. You can get on our list in order to receive invites by contacting us at reloandes@state.gov. We also post our webinar information and a lot of other information on events and English language on Facebook and Twitter. All of our webinars are recorded, so if you go onto YouTube and search RELO Andes webinars, you will be able to find all of the recorded versions there. So again, we hope that you can join us next month. That is on May 24th when we talk about multi-level classes. So thank you for joining us, and we hope to see you next month.